Hello, and thank you for joining me. I want to talk about a very topical issue, which I think is really become to the 2010s what um, I suppose you could say the gay rights movement was to the 2000s and the 1990s, in the sense that it's gained the sort of traction that that movement gained in the past. Um, I really think today in most Western societies homosexuality is really not an unusual thing. It's really not something that people look at in any sort of surprise anymore. It really is mainstream. It's not to say that the situation is perfect, but I mean, in my country, for example, in the UK, we've had gay marriage for 2 or 3 years now. Whatever you think of that, it's an indication of how mainstream it's now become. Now, I've always been a supporter of gay rights, and I'm broadly speaking in favor of gay marriage. I can understand both sides. I can understand people who say you can't redefine marriage and so on, but broadly speaking, I'm in favor of it on the grounds of equality, equal opportunity in someone expressing their love that way. But that's another issue. That's for another video. What I want to speak about here is transgender issues. Now, I think this is something that is very different from homosexuality. Obviously, it's a different thing, but I think it's important to make some analogies with previous movements. There's also been people who have said that they've made analogies with the civil rights movement. There's some fundamental differences here because racial discrimination and homophobia are definitely manifestations of deep set bigotries against people for no other reason than the colour of their skin or their sexual orientation. Now, with the transgender issue, I do think there's a big difference. Firstly, the demographic that we're talking about is extremely smaller than either minority people or gay and lesbian people. That doesn't mean that they don't have human rights. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't be considered, but that is a fact. It's estimated to be less than 1% of people are transgender. But I really think that it's problematic to make comparisons with the civil rights movement because what we were talking about is men, women, and children who were actively campaigning for to be treated with the same respect and dignity and opportunities and not to be discriminated against because of the color of their skin. Again, with homosexuality, it's only religious hardliners don't believe that it's anything other than a biological fact. You get it in nature, and it's some people are gay. They're attracted to people of the same gender. But with the transgender issue, what we're looking at is not something that is natural. It's just not. And that's not a hateful comment. It's not. People who are transgender feel that they're in the wrong body. They make the decision to transition into the gender that they feel they should have been born with. Now, I want to be very clear that there's a difference between having views on something and hating people. If I hated transgender people, you would see that in the sort of tones that I'm using. I don't hate transgender people. I have no reason to hate them. They've done nothing to me. Why would I hate them? I want to get that out of the way because very often this has become such a taboo subject in terms of it's become the latest so-called progressive issue whereby unless you slavishly agree, then you're a bigot. But this is somewhat different from even the feminist movement or the gay rights movement in that this really is quite polarizing even within the left. Um, if we want to use the left right pendulum, because what we're increasingly seeing now is even feminists are finding themselves in hot water for their views on trans women. An example of this recently is Lily Madigan. I'm not going to say she because I would be a hypocrite if I did. It's against what I believe in. But this person, Lily Madigan, is a trans woman, 19 years old, now a Labour Party women's activist, and they got the position controversially by pushing out a woman who was critical of transgender women being defined as women. And this is happening Kent council level, but basically you can see examples of this all over the Western world. And we are living in a situation whereby science is seen as secondary to feelings, to sensitivities. This to me is an upside down world. That sort of mindset, whereby the way someone feels matters more than what is actually true, what is actually scientific fact. It's got nothing to do with religion. It's got nothing to do with, oh, the Bible says this, the Bible says that. I'm not a practicing Christian. So I want to dispel that notion as well. That for me, it's not so much a moral issue as a truth issue, a basic truth issue. And fundamentally, it is my view that someone born with a penis can never be a woman, can never be what we define as a woman. Now, if we're talking about gender identity, i.e., masculinity, femininity, it goes without saying that you get feminine men and more masculine orientated women. That's something that I think most people would recognize, you know. And I want to be clear that I am not someone who believes in rigid gender roles. So I'm not of the view all men should be hunter gatherers who never speak about their feelings, and all women should be passive stay at home mothers, or whatever the stereotypes would be. I'm not of that view. I do think that is rigid, and I do think it is right that we challenge sort of notions about, oh, you should man up or you should be ladylike. Um, my own my own feeling of what I'm attracted to, I do like feminine women because I believe opposites attract. I wouldn't call myself alpha male per se, but I'm definitely more veering towards that line of things. So naturally, women who are very in touch with their feminine side are very attractive to me. In fact, to be honest, that's a lot more attractive to me than looks. So a woman who's maybe not necessarily aesthetically beautiful, but is very in touch with her femininity, is more attractive to me than a woman who is very aesthetically beautiful but might be a bit um, of an aggressive person or a loudmouth, and just characteristics that are not attractive in a woman. And by a loudmouth, I'm not talking about a woman speaking her opinions. I'm just talking about obnoxious ladette style. If you're from the UK, you'll have some idea what I'm talking about. But what bothers me about this is we are going down a track whereby you have to accept the narrative that anyone who calls himself a woman is a woman. And if you don't accept that, then you're a horrible transphobic bigot. This is this is crazy. We're seeing examples of it now all over the Western world. What I take issue with is that it's automatically dismissed as hate. It's not hate. Well, okay, there might be people who hate transgender people, and I'm well aware. For example, we see statistics like transgender people face violence. There was a horrible example, I think it was earlier this year in Brazil. A transgender person was viciously beaten to death. Now, you know that whatever your views are, something like that is horrible, and any reasonable human being would unreservedly, without caveat, condemn that. I condemn it. No one should be attacked for who they are, whether you agree with it or not. I mean, it goes without saying. So, in terms of violence against transgender people, absolutely that is wrong, and it should be. There's no caveat for that at all. Um, Having said that, I've heard examples of men who thought that they were going to bed with a woman, and they saw that there was someone who was pre operation, transgender, and well, I think that's incredibly deceptive myself. Um, to basically mislead someone into thinking that you are a post operation, well, that you're a woman and that you're not, that you still have a penis, that is enough to drive a lot of men, heterosexual men, really, and that's understandable. I imagine it would be exactly the same with lesbian women who think that they're. In fact, there was a case where a woman was arrested for misleading a heterosexual woman into believing she was a man. She got arrested for assault on the other woman. And I don't want to go too far off track, but deception is a real issue as well. Um, I've heard, transgender people say it's difficult to find partners, but that's that's the way it is, and I think that brings me to another point. There is this thing that if a heterosexual man is attracted to a transgender woman, someone who identifies as a woman, that doesn't make him gay. In theory, it doesn't because the person identifies as a woman. But personally, I cannot ever imagine a situation whereby, no matter how attractive the transgender person was, that if you felt an attraction there, that wouldn't be at least partially gay. And that's not, I don't care, but let's not redefine redefine adjectives that are clearly understood. So the definition of heterosexuality is being attracted to the opposite sex, right? Not the opposite gender, the opposite sex. So as a heterosexual man, I am attracted physically, aesthetically, sexually to women. I will never be attracted to a trans woman. Why? Because I know that no matter how much they look after themselves, how outwardly physically attractive they are, if I knew they once had a penis, it will never, ever, ever, ever work for me. It just won't. I've seen transgender women who do look after themselves and are outwardly, they do look like women, especially in, we all know about Thailand and the situation there. But fundamentally, what we're getting at here is forcing people to believe something that simply isn't true. It simply isn't. Now, I know that there is this debate about, well, transgender teens hate themselves, and to go through this operation is a way to get out of that self hatred. And there's a whole range of issues to do with psychosis and with depression connected to how people feel about this. Now, I'm not going to delve too much into that realm because I'm not an expert. I'm not qualified to do that. But um, I think we are going down a dangerous route when we're telling young children, sometimes as young as 3 or 4 years old, this has been a trend in some schools in the UK recently, that they cannot even use the word boys and girls. I mean, are we really going down that path where we're getting so rigid about terminology that we're now confusing children? Because that is what's actually happening. Surely that is far more dangerous to tell children that there is 30 odd genders rather than. I think the best approach would be not to go down that line, not to confuse them. Certainly teach tolerance. When they're a bit older, for example, I would advocate that yes, there are people who have different lifestyles and they identify in different ways, and it's important that you're tolerant. But to actually tell children that they cannot use the word boys or girls, this is I forget the school, but this was reported recently. That to me is insane. That is utterly insane. Um, you also get examples of uptight parents who want to sue big stores because they have boys section and a girls section. You know what? No one is forcing you to buy anything. If your little boy is more, he likes girls' toys, so what? Just go to the girls section and buy him a doll. Um, we are getting into a situation where we are everything and everyone is being expected to change basically to pander to a very small minority of the population. Now, a civil society, a compassionate society, should always make sure that minorities are not being persecuted. But I do not agree that the majority, the vast majority, has to change from the demands of a minority. That to me is insane. And it isn't every transgender person, incidentally, that's demanding these things. Um, there are transgender people who just want to get on with their own life, and that's fine. But you see situations like Bruce Jenner being named Woman of the Year. I mean, this is madness to me. This is utterly. I can't get my head around that. So this is one area I would actually agree with feminists. You cannot claim that because you have transitioned and you now identify as a woman, then you are a woman and you know exactly what it is like to have been through the life of a woman. Or vice versa, as a man, that's an area that's less spoken about the other way around. Um, Certainly, you would have a very in depth, well, let's say a very I'm trying to think of the right words to exemplify what I'm talking about. You would certainly have you would feel a connection to the sex that you identify with. But what basically concerns me is we are now in a situation whereby you are expected to use these rigid pronouns. And the rigid pronouns I'm talking about is not male and female because it's actually this idea there's 30 different genders. I've known one or two transgender people, and I've never addressed them in the way they didn't want. Not because I was being politically correct, but just because I couldn't be bothered with the fallout from it. But you can never force someone to believe that someone who was born with a penis will be a woman. You just can't. You just can't. Um, and what we are seeing is this forced conformity to pander to an extremely small minority of the population, the science of which is far from universally agreed. Um, and it does concern me that we're we are confusing, especially children, not from compassion, but from overt sensitivity and a misplaced sense of virtue signaling. It's really, I mean, are we going to get into a situation where you can never actually even say man or woman? I've heard of examples of companies and so on going down that line of they're starting to not even say man or woman. I mean, are we uh, really? Are we going down that line? Um, so summed up, I really am of the view live and let live. I don't feel any personal threat from transgender people. I don't. So I certainly don't hate them, but I do feel concerned with the way that we are forcing people to use terminology that simply isn't factually true. I mean, if we're talking about etiquette and respect, okay, I'm not going to go up to a trans woman and say, "Oh, you had a dick." I don't believe that you're a woman. That would be there's no need for that. But likewise, that person cannot force me to talk to them to constantly say she and her, and I might do it for simplistic reasons, but when you start to see a situation where trans women are being defined as women, which totally disregards basic biology, that's that really is quite concerning. And the whole issue of the trans rights movement has now become the latest virtue signaling thing. It's now a case, particularly in the United States, that if you don't agree that someone who has transitioned is a woman, then you're a horrible bigot. And that to me is that's where the real intolerance lies. Um, and if you're watching this and you have transitioned, all I can say is what I've said. I don't hate you. I don't. But you cannot say I demand that you see me as a woman. I see you as a human being. I respect you as a human being, but you cannot force me to believe that you are a woman. No. I'll treat you with respect. I'll treat you like I treat everyone else. But if you had a penis, you're not biologically a woman. You never will be. the surgical procedure, whatever it involves. I watched a film recently. Don't know how accurate it was. A British film from 1996, and the transgender character in that explained to their friend what how the surgery went. They took the penis off and used the skin for, I don't know. It was a bit complicated, but um, to me, this is something that is going down the line of just pandering to sensitivities and feelings over hard science. You might get in nature examples of, for example, sea lions, not sea lions, excuse me, seahorses can mutate their gender, excuse me, mutate their sex. So there are some examples of it in nature, but when human beings do it, it's artificial. It's a surgical procedure. It's not biology, and that's a fact, and it will always be a fact. Let me know your thoughts. Anyone, accusing me of transphobia, the onus is on you to prove me wrong. The onus is on you to explain how someone born with a penis can be a woman. And I'm not talking about gender identity, like feeling feminine. I'm talking about sex. I'm talking about basic biological sex, right? And, those who say that biology doesn't define you, that's true. But what we are seeing is that the biology is being used by the trans movement to define them, because it's not about I identify as a woman, it's about I am a woman. Now, that statement, I am a woman, is a statement of biology. I would argue more than identity. You could argue it's both, but it indicates biology. And you cannot turn a dog into a cat. You cannot turn a giraffe into an elephant. You just can't. And that's all there is to it. And I do think the Western world is going down, and this is predominantly a Western phenomenon right now. Yes, I'm aware in parts of South Asia you have, I believe they're called Hijra, people in parts of India and Pakistan, which are third gender. Um, but the the trans movement as a social justice warrior issue, as a progressive issue, is definitely a Western phenomenon. And I think it's incredibly misplaced to force people to redefine what is obvious.